Thanks everyone for joining. Good afternoon or good evening, or in some cases, good morning, I suppose. Thanks for joining the session. This is Finance Executive Networking Group. This is the international group. And we try to bring topics of interest to our community. Today, we're very fortunate to have Paul Herrerias, who is a good friend and a dear colleague of mine. Paul has been an executive search expert and advisor to private equity firms for several decades, and I won't say how many. But I was fortunate enough that he placed me in one of my CFO roles with a private equity-backed global company. So I know Paul has global experience as well as a relationship with a lot of PE firms in US. And we thought this would be an interesting topic for our CFO group, and Paul would be an excellent person to talk to it. I found him to be very understanding of PE firms look for, and also what the role of CFO is, as well as other C-suite roles that he has filled in his career. With that brief introduction, I'm going to turn it over to Paul to talk about the topic. We'll ask everyone to stay on mute. If you have questions, please put them in the chat, and I'll try to hold those until the end, and then I'll try to moderate a bit to make sure we get questions answered. We're recording this session, and Paul has kindly agreed to share his presentation and the recording with folks if you can't attend or attended but also want the backup material. So Paul, turn it over to you. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Susie. No, I appreciate that, and I really appreciate the opportunity to share with the Financial Executives Networking Group. We've been running in parallel for a few decades, and we all have the same mission, which is to really help get the right people in the right place at the right time to help grow businesses. And without a CFO, businesses just can't grow. So this is a critical mission that we're all working on, and I've been honored to be a part of this mission for many years. I also am honored to be considered a friend by Susie Taharian, who's a real, what I would call, role model for what a great CFO for a private equity-backed organization would look like. So when she asked me to speak with this group today, I'm like, absolutely, Susie, anything for you. So thank you. I'm going to share my slides, and I'm going to try to run through a lot of information fairly quickly, but Susie's agreed to help moderate the Q&A. So put questions in the chat, and we'll see what we can do to cover as much as possible. So let's see, I'm going to start my share here. Is that working there?
Perfect.
Yeah, yes, it's good.
Excellent, good. And I do have a Microsoft mouse, a fairly new one, and it's very sensitive. So if I wave my hand over it, it thinks I'm clicking it. So if I back up every once in a while, that's why. So this is an idea that's been percolating for a while. I've been recruiting in the CFO's department, I say for 30 years, but it's probably closer to 40 years now. I worked as a CPA with a Big Four CPA firm before I had an epiphany that if I was really going to help people build businesses, I need to address the human element, the teams, not just the finances and budgets and plans. And that really changed my career. So I went from being a CPA auditor to a recruiter, and then a career coach. And then I went and got a master's in organizational development and the study of leadership of high-performing business teams. And that's what I've been doing for the last 30 years. Executive search is my tool for doing that and getting in and work with companies and understanding their strategy and understanding their culture. And with those two things, I'm able to help design the right roles and then find the right people to fit those roles. So that's kind of what we do. There's a lot involved. It's one of those things that it sounds simple, but it's pretty complex in what goes in behind it. Today, I thought we would try to be ambitious and cover an introduction to what Comar Partners does and how we work with PE firms, and then what I call the dirty dozen derailers. These are the reasons that I get phone calls. Some private equity partner on the board says, hey, we got to change out the CFO because, and so I started making mental notes of, well, why is this happening? You know, so if I could share the because with you all, it might be helpful. And then we're going to talk about what they do want and what to provide to be successful as a CFO, and then some resources that will help CFOs as they build in their career, and you're never done until you really retire from work, but you have to keep learning all along the way and improving and keeping up your career momentum. Then I have put together my top 10 books to read, and I've been trying to read a lot of books to help supplement and to be able to converse with CEOs and boards, because they do a lot of reading. And I want to know what they're thinking, and is there a particular style that they're trying to emulate? And so if we've read those books, it really helps be successful as well. And then I have a little, how prepared are you? And so I'm going to share just some of my models for careers that I use to coach and also to assess CFOs for these jobs. And now it says poll number 1. So we're going to test our technology here and see if everybody can answer this first poll for us. We'll do 4 polls through the presentation today. And Charlotte, whenever you're ready to give us the results of that poll, we'll move on.
Looks like, can you see the screen, Paul, or?
Yes, 75% of the participants today have worked for private equity-backed company. So that's fantastic. That's a very educated audience and very relevant. So, and the other 25%, the question is, do you want to? So we'll find out by the end of this presentation here. Who is Comar Partners? We spun out of a global retained executive search firm. We were like the 10th or 12th largest retained search firm in the world. I ran the San Francisco office for 13, 14 years, and the head of the Chicago office, and I spun out to create Comar Partners to be kind of a national firm that really focused more on search work rather than building committees. So it's just a little bit of introduction to us. We're about 18 people in total right now. And you can see here we're spread out across the country with 6 offices, 6 search consultants, and a lot of industry practice groups that we support there as well. We do three different services that we provide to help our clients, to build these teams. The first is executive search, and that's where all of us spend most of our time. We also have a division called professional recruiting. So sometimes a client will say, hey, we've got the executive team now in place. Let's do some more middle management work or a volume of recruiting across the country in a particular area. And we bring retained search services to that offering. And then talent advisory is helping onboarding executives, assessing executives, helping with due diligence of teams, that type of work. And you'll see our industries on the right side there. So we have a private equity practice. And I would say that over the last 10 years, about at least half of the search work that I've done, CEO, COO, CFO, has been for private equity companies. And I lead our CFO practice. And again, over half of my searches that I do are for CFOs of various sizes of companies across many industries and across the United States. A little bit about my background here. I put something in the slide that I've never put in another bio slide before, so you guys are privy to this, but I started my life as a farmer, and I spent 9 or 10 years making money on a farm, and that's how I paid for my college expenses. So when I'm working with food processing companies or food production companies, sometimes I'll surprise them by knowing a lot more about their business than they would expect a headhunter to know. So we're going from that to being an accountant to being a recruiter, and then focusing for the last 20 years really on how do you build and coach the leadership teams. I actually spent some time with the California Society of CPAs, was president in the San Francisco chapter. I was actually one of the earliest, youngest presidents of the Institute of Management Accountants, the CMA, in San Francisco as well. So I've always been very interested in the professional community for CFOs. This is just a smattering of some of the private equity firms that we have worked with over the years. So it's been, big and small firms, and these are kind of more the middle range ones. These are some of the searches that I have worked in recently. I just thought it'd be interesting to share some of the things that I've been up to in the last 6-12 months. We did a CFO search for a cyber insurance company, and that's a very hot new space. So 3-year-old company with $1 billion valuation, for example. There was a lot of energy and excitement that went into that, and a tremendous amount of, like most of the searches that you're going to be competing in, a lot of requirements. So it's really threading the needle. The second one is a music industry service company in a very small town in the Midwest. Talk about a difficult location to recruit somebody from the music industry. And so we had to work on both coasts and help people really get to know the location and sell the culture of that, as well as the opportunity. And the rest of them you can see in there, but each of these searches, we probably on average would look at 300 to 400 profiles of CFOs that were pre-screened already across the country by industry and size and location. So we do a lot of research work on our CFOs, and we'll talk to maybe 50 of those directly and present 6 to 10 to our client to get to the one. And we track and communicate with a lot of CFOs and place about 1%. So the second poll, Charlotte is going to do the second poll for us now. So if you're working with a private equity firm, it's one thing, it's very hard to get hired by a private equity-backed company because it's a very rigorous process. There's a lot of hurdles. Some of them are realistic. Some of them are pretty arbitrary, in my opinion, as to why they're asking for those things from their CFOs, but it makes it really hard to get in. It's also hard to get it all the way through to an exit. So you've got to stay there 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years to be able to get to the point where the company can sell. And a lot can go wrong in the meantime. And sometimes you're on the wrong end of the stick when it comes to replacing that CFO. And so getting to the point where you're actually going to complete an exit is, again, very hard. So here's our survey results that say that 30% of the people on this call have gone through an exit with a PE-backed company. So that's phenomenal. There's the creme de la creme of the CFOs in the private equity world. And the rest of them are still working to get there. And if I ask that poll again in a year, they'll probably be a much higher percentage. So let's take a look at some of the things that go wrong. Why do the PE firms call me and say, hey, Paul, let's change out our CFO? One, and these are in no particular order. When we get to my suggestions for success, how to turn this around, I've got those ordered for you. But if I just think about why is it that they're calling, one is what I call opaqueness or lack of transparency. It's like, I really don't know what's going on inside the company, or I feel like the CFO's not giving me all the answers. Maybe something's going wrong and they don't want to tell me, or maybe they don't know, they don't have a handle on the situation, but I just can't get a good, clear reading of what's going on in the company. The second one is pace. Private equity firms are on a time agenda. Time is money, capital costs money, everything's got a time frame to it. So they want to move fast. They like people who can make decisions. Whether you're right or wrong, let's make some decisions. Let's move forward. Let's learn from it. Let's fine tune and recalibrate our sights and try again. But they like CFOs that can move at a pretty fast pace. Values clash, and this is a style issue, or it could be a communications issue, but sometimes it's just a feeling like it's a mishmash for the right environment for what the board needs, what the company needs here today. Or maybe you really value moving really fast, whereas your board likes to do more analysis. And so there's a mismatch between the values and the behaviors you're exhibiting and what the board really wants. Demographics misfits, demographics of time, place, money. Compensation used to be a big challenge. The last couple of years, it's been location is a big challenge. People not wanting to be in the office, whereas they need you to be in the office or think they need you to be in the office. So there's a lot of demographics mismatch that's been going on. And if you do acquisitions or they want to move the headquarters and you can't move, you can't relocate, they don't. There's another reason that we've been hired to find a new CFO. So that's a demographics is, and typically it's been a location issue or travel issue. Losing career momentum, and the private equity guys, when they hire a CFO, they want somebody who's really good, that's going to give them good information, make good decisions, build teams inside the organization, put a lot of time and energy into it. If you make too many bad decisions in your career, if you go to too many companies that fail or don't survive, or you're not achieving success, they see that as a negative. They want to put their money on a winning horse. So they're looking for people who have good career momentum and a track record of success. Poor communications, and that may be a little bit in reference to the number one, opaqueness, but if you're not communicating enough or in enough detail or often enough, or you're not giving them the answers or the style that they're looking for, that could create a real rift and lose trust and faith and confidence in the organization. So it's good to know who you're targeting. Is it the CEO? Is it the chairman of the board? Is it head of the finance committee of the board? What do they want? What questions are they going to ask every time? What's their communication style? If you think about the Myers-Briggs or the DISC, how do they like to be communicated to? You have to pay attention to that because it's the foundation for relationships and trust throughout the rest of your career with them. Disloyalty, sometimes they question, well, are they loyal to the prior CEO? Are they loyal to the founder? Or who are they loyal to? Are they loyal to us? And so this is another issue that comes up sometimes that will undermine the rest of all the good things that you do. So sometimes it just helps to let them know, look, I was friends with the founder, but I'm committed to you guys. I'm committed to this mission. I'm committed to this team. I'm committed to this board. Let them know that. It never hurts. Inaccurate reporting. Make sure the numbers you give them are right. That really goes a long ways. I've had a few conversations with investors or boards or PE guys, and they say, we're trying to do a deal, we're trying to do an add-on, but the CFO's numbers just weren't accurate, didn't add up properly. It caused us to lose faith in that acquisition, so we canceled the deal. So more than one deal has been lost by having forecasts or budgets that are inaccurate, or information on your monthly or quarterly reports or the deck that are not accurate. So make sure you got that buttoned up. Being stiff, not being resilient. As we all know, things change. Death and taxes being the only things that are certain in this life, everything else is going to change. And so we have to be able to change with it. And sometimes the change is going to hurt and it's going to be not pretty. But as the CFOs, we have to be the leaders that show everybody how to stay resilient and how to move through change. So think of yourself a little bit as a change management, change catalyst, so a change agent. And what does that mean? How does it manifest itself? Because if you come across as being stuck in the mud and resilient to not willing to change, that's another reason that they'll replace the CFO. Lacking capacity. Oh, great CFO. Yeah, they can get all the accounting done. What about budgeting, planning, forecasting, treasury, IT, systems, HR, security? There's a lot of other things that go along with it. And that's another big reason why, as a company grows, they'll call me and they'll say, hey, we need a CFO who has more capacity to grow the business. So think about, what is it going to take to grow the business, and how can I be that person? Lacking capacity, I'm also going to throw in there this one, flying solo. Build your teams. Having all the answers yourself is fantastic, but it's not as good as building a team that can come up with the answers and be sustainable. And I'll reinforce some of those, all of these points actually coming up here. Trustworthy, be careful what you say and who you talk to. Be careful about complaining too much. You want to make sure that they know that they can count on you in confidence and in support and positivity and in commitment. So what I was going to suggest is, as we go through these next slides, which is kind of turning those positives now and those negatives into positives, think about which of these are my strengths and what can I do to get even stronger, better, and more competitive in each of these areas. So instead of having what we call a fixed mindset that you're already perfect, bring a growth mindset that says, how can I continue and get better? So that's the challenge for you now, is as we go through these slides, make some notes of that. At the end of it, ask yourself, what were the top 3 to 5 strengths that I really have of these 12 characteristics? And what are 3 to 5 areas where I can really work on immediately getting some more improvement? And then I also threw in here, when I'm coaching CFOs, I let them know, take that list and work with your coach, your mentor. Maybe your CEO can be your mentor, or maybe somebody on the board or somebody outside of the company. But it's always good to have somebody you're coaching with and keeping you fresh and bringing you new ideas or book recommendations or introducing you to somebody else that can contribute to the solution of a challenge that you're facing right now. Okay, so now let's take a look at some of the things that I'm going to break it down into and say, how do you prepare to be a CFO for a private equity organization? Number one is career momentum. So make sure that the decisions you make in choosing your employer have some sound logic behind them, and that there's a good chance this company will be successful and you will be successful with that company as well. So a little bit of pre-thought. Can't tell you how many times I've had clients question a candidate's resume. Well, why did they make that move? Why have they had 2 short moves here? What's going on? So they question the momentum of every candidate that we work with. So part of what I do is get to know the CFO, get to know their resume, walk through every opportunity, every job they've had. Why did you take that job? What did you accomplish there? What did you learn there? And why did you leave that job? It's a lot of work to do that on my part, but I have to do that to answer this question. Capacity for growth. So you want to prove to your future employer that you have that capacity for growth, that you can organize your time and give yourself room for some deep work so that you can achieve some great things, that you're continuing to learn and develop, not just in one area, but in all the areas necessary for CFOs. So be conscious about expanding your capacity. Values fit. How do you know if your values fit if you don't know your own values? So some of you have gone through my exercise of doing a career survey with me, and you'll know that values is one of the questions that we ask. What are your top 7 values in life? And how do you prioritize them, 1 through 7? So that means you need to become very clear about what you stand for. What principles do you make decisions based on? Good exercise. Go to work on it now, because it takes a long time to answer that question effectively, to the point where you own your values and you get emotional about them. When you get to that point, you're excited about your values, your principles, then you know you're ready to go to work. And you don't even have to tell people what they are. Your actions will communicate them to the people around you. Demographics fit, and I could go more detail on that, but know upfront what your compensation expectations and needs are, because those are 2 different questions. Always have to work with those with my CFO candidates. 3 questions that I ask them. What are you used to making? What lifestyle have you built around your compensation? What do you expect to make in your next job? What's the marketplace telling you? What are your mental expectations? 3, what's the minimum cash flow that you need to survive to be able to consider career opportunities? And anything below that number, we're not going to call you. We're not going to tell you about it. You're not going to have an opportunity to even discuss it because there's no need, because that's a hard fixed number. You need to know what that number is. Always surprises me when I ask people these three questions, and somebody might say, well, I'm making a base of 250. I expect to make a base of 275, but I really, my minimum is $300,000. Right. That's kind of backwards. What's the minimum you need to survive and be able to consider a really good career opportunity? So arm your recruiter with all of those numbers. That doesn't mean that you're doomed to only make your minimum. No, it just means that you get to hear about opportunities with that base, plus bonus, plus equity, and any other benefits and location and culture, opportunities, business plan, strategy, all those things. So help the recruiter by knowing yourself well enough to answer those questions quickly. So next thing we're talking about is the style. So now you've been through the preparation, you got hired on as a CFO. What do you look like when you show up? How about let's be an open book. Let's bring fast pace. Let's be resilient and adaptive. And let's be a good communicator and influencer in the organization. And now let's talk about execution. So what are you going to get done? We're going to be loyal, and we're going to be accurate, and we're going to be a team player and a team builder, and we're going to be a trustworthy CFO and member of the leadership team. What are the results that the private equity firms are looking for? As we all know, EBITDA is a very big focus for the private equity firms. They purchase companies based on EBITDA and multiples, and they sell companies based on EBITDA multiples. So that's how they're going to measure it along the way. Your job is to help them figure out how to measure that accurately and how to make it grow. Second thing is sustainability. So we're trying to get to these EBITDA numbers, and at the same time, we're trying to build a sustainable company and business and team. So they're going to be looking to you to do all of those things. And then what can we do to increase the multiple and the price when we go to exit the company? And can you close a deal? And I can't tell you how many times a candidate has been nixed to be a CFO because they just didn't see that person helping us to sell the business down the road. Not a good salesman, couldn't talk about the strategy and discuss the big picture potential for the company. So be thinking about that as one of the things that you want to include in interviewing processes. Let them know, hey, I can help you communicate the value of the business and how to sell the business. So I'm going to pause there, Susie, just to ask if you have any burning questions, and then I'll go into each of these slides in a little bit more detail.
That would be great. There was a few questions and I was holding them together. There was a little bit about sort of compensation. People said, what is a standard compensation package? What is standard equity for a CFO position? There was a couple other questions, but maybe if you want to touch on that. And then there was a couple of questions about whether a role as a CFO of a VC company transferred over to being a CFO of a PE company.
Good questions. Thank you. I work with a lot of middle market, and lately been doing some lower middle market size of deals, and the base salaries on those has been around 2 to 250, somewhere in that range in base, and 25 to 30% in bonus. And equity packages typically targeted that the CFO should be able to take home $1 million in 5 years, and it ranges from there. So some of the deals I've done recently, it was targeted at 600,000 in equity with a shorter time fuse, and one was $2 million in targeted equity for the CFO in a 4.5-year time frame. Probably the biggest one that I did recently had a $10 million valuation of the equity and target, and they were looking at 4.5 years on that one. But typically, you're gonna find kind of a rule of thumb of somewhere in the low 2s, 30%, and $1 million. Good starting point. In terms of VC and private equity, if I can address that for a little bit, there is some overlap, but not total overlap. You know, there are differences there. And it starts from the fact that the PE won't buy a company unless there's some positive cash flow, unless there's EBITDA. So going from already making money to making more money, a little bit different than going from startup to starting to make money.
There's a question about that you commented loyalty being important. How do people prioritize a loyalty to the board versus a loyalty to the CEO?
That's a good tightrope question. It's important that the CEO and the CFO have the tightest relationship in the business. And at the same time, the board has to feel comfortable that they're getting good information, that your relationship with your CEO is not going to hurt them. And the CEO needs to know that the board is going to look to the CFO for answers, and they want to get good answers, and that the CFO is going to have to give them good answers. So the CEO and the CFO have to have this understanding that we trust each other, and we're going to support each other, and we're going to be honest with the board. Because if not, it's going to endanger both of your jobs. So the CEOs have to know how to work that balance, and they can't ask a CFO to never, be dishonest with the board or cover up something that they're going to find out about later and be surprised about. Those are two deadly sins.
Paul, I totally agree. You mentioned about sort of the characteristics a CFO should have. Someone asked, is there a formal credential you have to be a PE CFO? Do you need a CPA? Do you need an MBA? Any formal credentials other than sort of the characteristics you talked about?
Yeah. And again, it depends a little bit on the size and on the industries. But recently, I have had more PE boards who have been, shall I say, flexible on that. Love an MBA, love a CPA, but it's not required. When I find the right person, those will be nice things, but they're not critical to us making this hire. What do you think is the most important thing? Is it a credential? And if not, what is it?
Is it track record, maybe, or reputation?
There you go. Yeah, that helps. And as you'll see towards the end of my slides here, I'll make sure I get in there. Your industry knowledge is the first thing they look for.
So I shouldn't have bought that online MBA for $50. Dang, Paul. All right.
All right. We'll get to that. I have a whole section on that. So I'll pick up the pace here. In fact, these next 12 slides explain each of the above elements. So if we look at preparation, style, and execution, these 12 items in here, I break out in these next few slides. So because I'll make the slides available, I won't spend too much time on these so that we can spend more time going through the resources in the end. I'll give you 20 seconds on each slide to just read it faster than I can talk about it. Okay, one exception, remote versus office. It's a big deal. It's a huge challenge. Every search, I'm banging my head against the wall because the CEO or the board wants the CFO to be in the office right next to the CEO. And a lot of CFOs don't want to do that. So that's a big deal right now. Don't have all the answers yet. I'm writing an article on that. Stay tuned.
Yeah. On the fit, there was a question about are PEs looking more for a strategic CFO versus quote unquote bean counter?
What's being more asked for in the marketplace is operational CFO. A lot of the PE guys like, we got the strategy. I mean, yes, we want you to be able to talk about the strategy to help us sell the business, but we wrote the strategy. That's what we do. We need you to execute. We need an operational CFO. We need somebody that can do accounting and finance and HR and operations and supply chain and contract negotiations with clients. And that type of the CFO is one that's the most sought after by PE.
And then someone asked a question, are they looking for a CFO with more risk appetite or more risk aversion, or what's that profile?
Yeah. They want a CFO who can analyze the risk and communicate it. Let the CEO or the board make the decision, but the CFO's job is to assess the risk, identify the risk and assess the risk and communicate the risks. That's the CFO that they really want. I mean, yes, you have to do some risking to grow, but they like to have a business plan in place before they buy a company. So they're not looking for somebody to be a cowboy. On fast pace, you know, when you interview with the CEO and a board for one of these jobs, get a good night's sleep. You know, bring your energy. So your diet, your exercise, your sleep, getting good balance, one of the best things you could do as an executive, because you make better decisions, you come across more calmly and more considerately. So that's important as leaders that we model the way. So not to mention, Susie, that you worked late last night and got up early again, but you know, that's not sustainable in the realm of successful CFOs. So you want to take good care of yourselves first so that you could then take care of your team and your business as well. So, but a lot of you guys are already wound with a pretty, you know, fast clock and a lot of energy. And that's attractive when you're interviewing and working with the private equity guys. Of course, resiliency, that's a really big deal. You know, you ask about venture capital and private equity, they share this, you know, in venture capital, it's fail fast. That's their mantra, you know, try things and fail fast, move forward, learn from it. And there's a little bit of that in the private equity as well. We want to make sure we're making decisions, but we have to stay competitive in the marketplace as well. Communications is really key. I've read a couple of books recently on radical candor and how to communicate effectively in your messaging. I think it's good to do that.
On this topic of loyalty, if I could jump in, there's a question about if the CEO is not trustworthy and the board is not aware, how does the CFO convey that information? I think this is, again, a divided loyalty question.
Yeah. A good board is having one-on-one conversations all the time and creates an environment where a CFO would be able to share any hesitations or concerns or observations about the CEO or anybody on the team. Yes, you put your foot in a different camp if you go to the board and complain about the CEO. But if you can put it into the context of a constructive comment, that would be helpful. If you feel it's important for the success of the business, you owe it to the board to share that information. And again, try to do it in a constructive way so that maybe they can coach the CEO on that element to do better. But as you'll see here in a minute, I think it's important that you have these conversations going with the board. Too many boards are perfunctory and it's bump and run and you don't have a personal relationship. And I think it's a CFO's responsibility. And this is what I tell my CFOs, you know, it's your responsibility to get to know the board members on an individual basis. Schedule some time with them. And if you start doing that up front, it makes it more normal and natural. I invented this TRACK acronym. Whoops, sorry. Timely, relevant, accurate, consistent, and complete. And in terms of my CFOs and the reporting that they do to the CEO, the senior leadership team, and the board.
On this topic, there's a question. Private equity firms that I work with anyway are very well known for liking data and asking a lot of questions and really getting into the nuts and bolts of the business. And the question someone asked was, what is a healthy level of the private equity firm getting into the weeds? And sort of separating the board role from the management role, but I know this is a tough one with PEs. Right.
Yeah, exactly. And I have these conversations as well. Not uncommon for a CFO for private equity backed firm to be helping put together 40, 50, 60, 70 page decks, you know, to go out to the board. The boards like a lot of information, and a good board will say, we like to know what's going on because we're helping with the strategy and acquisitions and add-ons and when to sell and, you know, things of that nature. but we're not here to make management decisions. That's up to you guys. So sometimes you have to push back on the boards and let them know that and remind them of that. If we don't have the ability to make decisions, then you're amputating our ability to lead and taking away our natural desire and morale for leading and making decisions. But we'll bring you information and just recognize what they need that information for versus what you need it for making management decisions versus these more corporate development decisions that the board makes. Team player, I like to remind everybody it's the 3 C's of teamwork: communications, competency, and commitment. And Dr. Larson's book on teamwork is where I learned those 3 things, and I've been using those for years in my coaching of teams. It's important that you are building teamwork with the board, with the CEO, and with the senior leadership team. 25% of your time is managing the whole business. 75% of your time is being a CFO, running the CFO's department. So recognize that you have 2 teams you need to work with there: the senior leadership team and your team in your organization. And that's critical to the private equity guys, that you build a really solid team inside the CFO's department as well.
Communication, Paul, there was a question about, would you suggest that the CFO build a weekly call with the board members or some kind of a regular cadence, just sort of an offline conversation?
Yes, weekly might be too much, but yes, you want to have a channel of communications with the board member, because these board members get recruited sometimes because of bringing capital or industry knowledge or connections. We can't take advantage of that if you're not talking to the board. And that's one of the biggest gaps that I see out there, is a lot of board members are feeling underutilized, and they love it when the CFO calls them up and says, hey, I've been thinking about, maybe we should do an acquisition, or what about this company, or hey, what's going on in our industry? Are we normal with this cost structure that we have? I mean, those kinds of conversations are really good. So pick up the phone, call board members, and keep that open door with them, and ask them, what level of communications would you like to hear from me? And that way you'll have a better idea of the cadence. The last line of the slide is trustworthy. Speak up when something is wrong. That kind of summarizes what we've been talking a little bit about of when you communicate with the board, including if something's wrong with the CEO. A lot of CFOs that I've worked for have had challenging situations with CEOs. Some they shared with the board, some they didn't. But eventually, if you're having a challenge with the CEO, more people are going to have it. So call the CEO out on that behavior when necessary, and share it with the board when necessary as well. You owe it to the business, and you owe it to the stakeholders to do that. I spent a decade teaching the ethics class for CPAs to renew their license. I brought in guest speakers who are CEOs who some had been challenged to stay in line, others hadn't. All have had wonderful stories to tell, but the biggest message I got from one of the CEOs I brought in one time, who actually went to prison for his behavior, and was still willing to agree to be a speaker in my class, but he said, Paul, call me out when I'm going over the line. You have 100,000 CPAs on your side, so it's not just you. You're not alone. All right, so what did we talk about? We talked about how to prepare your career to go to work for a private equity-backed firm. You know what they're looking for now. We talked about the style that you need to bring working in a PE firm. And we talked about execution, how to go about your job, and the results that the PE firms are looking for that you want to be focused on from the very beginning and talk to them about, from interviewing to monthly reporting to selling the business, and then using them as a reference later on. Make them part of your posse, your mentoring board. So here's another poll for you. If you work for a PE firm, would you do it again?
I'm not sure if Charlotte is running that.
Well, tell you what, just raise your hand
here
on your Zoom.
That's the wrong question.
Sorry. Shaw, do you have the poll? Sorry, I don't seem to be able to bring up the right
Oh,
question.
no worries. If everybody just, raise your hand if you on your Zoom there. There you go. If you would do it again. Good. There's a lot of benefits to working with private equity firms. I have candidates that come to me, hey, as a CFO, I want nothing better than to work with an organization that knows where the heck they're going. They have an idea why we're here, and we're all, reading from the same hymnal. That's some of the advantages of working with a private equity firm. They give you more room. You're going places. And I have an expression that not even God can steer a parked car. If you're working for an organization that's a parked car, it's no fun. So, hey, let's go to work for an organization that's a race car. And that's what the PE firms typically are like. All right. So going on to the next slide, we have to wrap it up here in just a few minutes. This is a little bit of my career planning model. If you want to talk about managing your career, you get hired for 4 reasons, or 4 legs of the stool here. 1 is your experience, 2 is your credibility, 3 is your trusting relationships, and 4 is the demographics fit. So looking at each of those, experience breaks down into, number 1, your industry. Do you know this business? Do you know people? Do you know how money is made in this industry? Do you know how to manage costs in this industry? So industry knowledge is the first thing that clients look for when I'm recruiting for CFOs. Second is the culture. Have you worked in this kind of a culture? Young organization, old organization, turnaround, fix it, high growth, whatever, talk about that culture. And the CEO plays a big part in that too. So it's both the dynamic of the company and the CEO. And then the functional roles, here we're talking about accounting and finance and HR and IT and facilities and supply chain and all those things that the CFOs get involved in. But one thing I want to emphasize is sales skills. Let them know you're a good salesperson, you're a good influencer, and you could help them sell this business someday. And then relationships and team building is about managing your ability to work with people, to talk with people, to influence people, to educate and to inform them. So your ability to build relationships and trust with people is very important, especially in private equity firms. And the idea of being a team builder, you build a team with your senior leadership team of the company, with your CEO, with the board, and your CFO departmental team as well. Credibility, references, resume, psychological profiling. If you've gone through any psychological profiles, the Hogan assessment, the PI, Myers-Briggs, any of those, share those with your recruiter. It's part of the process, and anything you could do to educate, again, builds trust, get to know you, get to know your style. That really helps with making a good fit in an organization. And PE firms use these all the time. I didn't mention posse, but I always tell people, they ask me, well, Paul, how many references should I provide? You should have 12 people ready to go to be a reference for you at any time. And those people should be part of your posse. Those are people that, if you got laid off tomorrow, those are the first people you would contact to try to help you get a new job. And you would help them. That's your posse. Trust, demographics, compensation, location, travel, time, work-life balance, and this idea of exercise and health and energy. Know yourself. Write down what you're willing to bring, what your needs and parameters are in each of these categories. Got to start there to define yourself as a CFO for a PE-backed company. Resources for private equity CFOs. Everybody should have all of these resources and be consciously thinking about utilizing these resources. Here's my recommended book list. I was asked to speak to a group of CFOs that all work for the same PE firm. There's 35 of them in the room. So it was a big PE firm. And they flew me to New York to talk to their CFOs. And one of the questions they asked me is, what books would you recommend for CFOs? And I said, well, I've been doing a lot of reading. I've probably read over 100 business books in the last 3 years alone. and not just business books, but kind of life books as well, that help you as a leader and as a executive and as a person. And so this is my lifelong. There's one more, well, maybe two more books that I didn't talk about, which I use all the time. One is called The First 90 Days by Michael Watkins. And so I give that to my CFO candidates when they've been placed, because it's a really valuable book. The second one for private equity is this private equity playbook. And another one is Courage to Lose Sight of Shore. It's about when it comes time to sell your business as a founder to a private equity firm, what do you need to know? What do you need to do? You have to be willing to adapt. Great book by Kelly Powell there. And this book's probably going to get it to my top 10 list at some point in time. Who, by the son of the gentleman who wrote the book Top Rating. So great book on how to build your team as well.
Paul, there was a couple of questions, and I'm going to ask them quickly because we're running out of time. One was a question that said, what has changed, if anything, in terms of what PEs look for CFOs, like maybe deal-making skills? And then there's a question on how important is culture for PE firms in looking at CFOs?
Okay, good. And I'll make this fairly quick. What's changed? This idea of remote work, how to manage remote teams, how to structure it and get the most out of it. That has been a big piece of it. And supply chain, we're getting more questions asking about how well you can manage supply chain, negotiate contracts and stay on top of things, manage costs. We're entering a period of PCF, positive cash flow. How well can you manage cash? That's becoming more critical now than it has been for the last 5 to 8 years. What was the second part of the question, Susie?
Does the topic of company culture resonate with PE firms? How important do they see culture, company culture?
I'm pleased to report that they're paying a lot of attention to it. You know, culture eats strategy for lunch. They bring the strategy. So they're looking to this team to bring the culture. And I'm getting a lot more airtime, which is exciting for me as an organizational development coach to hear that. So culture is really big. So again, know your values first, know what culture you want to build, and negotiate that with the CEO. And be clear, it's the CEO's ultimate responsibility to build that culture with your help.
Well, thank you. And there might be some questions I missed, but there's also a lot of comments in the chat with thank you and saying excellent topic. Really appreciate it. Looking forward to getting the deck and the recording. So that much appreciated, and a lot of folks chiming in, echoing the books that you mentioned, or they've worked with you in the past and are saying a shout out to Paul and appreciate the good advice here. Any closing comments you want to give, Paul, before we close this out?
I've dedicated my life to try to help businesses, grow by getting the right team in place to do it. So for me, it's a constant learning struggle. And even after 40 years, I still find recruiting is a real evolving, challenging business. And it's not one for faint of heart, but I love it. And it's exciting for me to be able to share some of the things that I've learned along the way and try to help. And private equity is seen sometimes as a really good or really bad, but it is just a tool, and it's really helped support our economy over the last 20 years. And, it's kind of the American way. It's about optimism, and we need to bring that optimism into our own lives and stay encouraged. It all starts right there with our own attitudes.
And I got to say, Paul, I've known you for years, is one of the best at this executive research and executive search role. He's part therapist, part counselor, part business coach, part CFO. So the searches that we've worked together, I've been so impressed. And thank you so much for sharing this. I won't read them all, but there was just so many comments that came back and said, wonderful presentation, super helpful. And I also was remiss at the beginning to give a quick recognition to my co-conspirators, John Crystal and Chris Chatton and Charlotte, who helped put together this event. it was certainly well received, so I really appreciate it. Paul, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. We will record this and share the recording and the deck by email. Charlotte usually sends it out the next day or so to everyone who registered. So whether you were able to attend or all or part of it, we'll still get you the recording. Thank you so much, and thank you all. We're at the hour, so we'll close on time, to be on time and on budget, to meet that PE requirement. Thank you, everyone. Stay.